Tonight on News 11, just as students get ready to go home for break, Western New York's COVID cases continue to rise. How is Albany trying to curb the spread? We talked to a student from Ohio to break down what this election means for young people and for the future. And after production was interrupted because of the pandemic, Fredonia's Small Business Revolution finally premieres. These stories and more, News 11 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome to News 11. I'm Ryan Blotto.
And I'm Hope Winter. Obviously, things look a little different tonight. Some of our crew members decided to quarantine before going home and before break, so our last two shows will be done remotely and pre-recorded.
And speaking of break, last week SUNY announced that students will have to test negative for COVID-19 within 10 days of leaving for Thanksgiving break. Here at Fredonia, the entire student body will be tested during the week of November 9th through November 13th. Resident halls on and off campus students will be divided by last names and will be assigned a certain day during that week. Students will have two opportunities during their assigned day between the hours of 9 a.m. to noon and 1 to 4 in the afternoon. Students will have some flexibility if they see their assigned day will not allow for 4 days before they leave campus. SUNY has requested for the 4-day window to allow the test results to be returned before the student can leave campus. Students will be facing disciplinary actions if they do not follow this rule. Everyone should have received an email from Enrollment and Student Services last week stating their assigned day. However, if students need to reschedule their assigned day, they should contact the pool testing office at pooltesting@fredonia.edu.
An update for students who will be traveling to Western New York for a break. Governor Cuomo has announced that parts of Erie County will be labeled as yellow zones. The yellow zone restrictions are to curb the virus before businesses, in-person classes, and gatherings have to be shut down. The restrictions include limiting capacity at businesses, mandatory testing at schools, and closing bars at midnight. On Monday, Western New York reported 414 new COVID cases and 117 patients were hospitalized as of Sunday. That marked the 7th straight day of 200-plus cases in the 5-county region. The New York State Liquor Authority, the State Agriculture and Markets Department, and the Erie County Health Department will be inspecting bars, restaurants, and supermarkets and big box stores to ensure that they are following the new guidelines. Cuomo says, quote, the microcluster approach works and is unarguable. For students who might have to quarantine and might be wondering how that process works, our producer Carl Aldinger talked to the school to break it down.
Let's look at the second to last section of the COVID-19 dashboard on the Fredonia website. There's a difference between isolation, mandatory quarantine, and precautionary quarantine.
The isolation is for someone who has tested positive.
The isolation is a minimum of 10 days.
Quarantine is someone who's been determined through contact tracing to be a close contact with someone who's tested positive.
This is a mandatory 2 weeks. And precautionary quarantine is for anyone who has traveled to Fredonia from out of state, with the exception of states that border New York. In terms of capacity for quarantine students, Fredonia apparently has 174 available rooms.
So as of right now, they have 27 rooms in Hendrick Hall.
That's assuming there's one person per suite so that they each get a private bathroom. But the pool testing office says that students who live together on campus and have to quarantine, they can be put in the same suite in Hendricks. This is called a family unit, and the capacity goes up. The same is true for Park Place, but 6 of the rooms there are being used for storage. So if everything is maxed out, there are 96 rooms in Hendricks, 72 in Park Place, bringing it up to 168. And if we have that many people in quarantine, we probably have some bigger problems.
If we reach our capacity for quarantine isolation, then we would be in a pause or potentially a go-home situation.
Marketing and Communications is making a video that lays out the quarantine process in more detail. But there are only 2.5 weeks left of the semester, so for the past 2 months, anyone who was wondering what that process looks like.
There is an FAQ on the website that addresses the testing, the isolation, and the quarantine procedures.
But not really. Under that FAQ, it just says students will be instructed to quarantine. So I asked Debbie Dibble the same thing.
Every single person is different. So it's not a cookbook, it's not a recipe.
Symptoms and isolation dates are different for each person, but Dibble says that if you test positive, you will be notified by either the health center or wherever you got the test. And with Thanksgiving break just a few weeks away, some students in quarantine might not feel comfortable going home to their families.
For students that have to go into isolation or quarantine, they are allowed to go home if they want to go home.
The choice is up to the students. For News 11, I'm Carl Aldinger.
The health center says that for any students that do choose to go home instead of isolating on campus, they need to find a way to get home without public transport and make sure they can still follow the quarantine protocols at home. This means having a private bedroom, either a private bathroom or a bathroom that can be cleaned after each use.
And as students get ready to move out for break, we want to look at how Resident Life's new sign-in policy held up this semester. Last month, Res Life started a two-step system to scan into your building, once at the door and again at the desk. We've talked to a few students who live in the dorms, and it seems that, for the most part, resident hall staff seem to be sticking to the policy. But some students in University Commons say they usually could just walk right past the desk when there's someone on duty. They don't have to sign in twice.
Ultimately, it's a community safety response and a community policing, and again, the expectation is that the staff we hire are doing the job they're supposed to do. And if they're not, students should be concerned about the safety of their building and report it to the building administrator, which is the RD.
Forster says that the students can also report this directly to the Residence Life office.
FSA is also making changes to deal with the problems of the pandemic. Cranston Marché has both takeout and dine-in options this year, and tables were removed in order to lower capacity and to maintain social distancing. But many students have noticed signs in the all-you-can-eat dining hall that say you either have to dine in or take out, but not both. FSA is concerned that students are using one meal swipe to eat two meals or to take food out for other people. Darren Schultz, the director of FSA, says this isn't financially valuable. Because of tax exemptions on meal plans, a student who pays for a meal with their Fred card has to be the one to eat that meal. Schultz says that FSA passively enforces this through policies and signage, but a lot of it falls on the students to honor the system.
We know some people take advantage of it. Most students don't. We don't, like I said, we don't want to be watching what students eat. That's not our position.
FSA also says they'll be changing hours for dining halls next semester. This is because more people than usual are leaving the dorms come spring. And student loan debt is at an all-time high this year. I looked into the FSA budget to see where exactly our money is going.
As the sun sets over another day at Fredonia, the prices of food continue to rise each year. Here at SUNY Fredonia, your meal plan does not only pay for the college essentials, but also this piece of property nearby that's not easily accessible for students to get to. The College Lodge, located 15 minutes away in Brockton, New York, was purchased during the Great Depression as a place for students to have a place to get away and enjoy the outdoors while they work towards their degrees. However, the upkeep of the lodge itself is causing an annual loss for the school. The Faculty Student Association, also known as FSA, is the nonprofit corporation that handles all food facilities on campus. FSA is also responsible for this piece of property, and they have access to the funds from student meal plans to pay for the property upkeep. According to the 2020-21 budget plan, FSA was planning on spending $88,000 for the total upkeep for the lodge itself and planned to make a total of $34,000 in revenue by the end of the year. However, the coronavirus pandemic swooped in and took that revenue down to nothing.
Because we're a corporation, all our expenses get lumped together at the end of the day, and we are basically subsidizing the College Lodge, of about $100,000 a year, and have been since 1971. This isn't something new.
But how much of students' lunch money is used towards this piece of property?
If we're gonna, let's try to put it simply, if we're gonna lose $100,000 a year on the property, and we generate, I'm just gonna make the math kind of simple, about $12 million a year of revenue. So of your meal plan money, then say about 0.8% would go to subsidize the College Lodge.
By the end of this year, Western New York Land Conservancy is planning on purchasing 168 acres of the forest land for $300,000. However, even with that one-time revenue coming into FSA, it will not change the price structure for food on campus and will not prevent FSA from taking the money from students' meal plans to fund pieces of property. FSA takes another $100,000 to fund the alumni house that is located right on the edge of campus. This means a total of $200,000 is taken out of students' meal plans each year. Mike Metzer has a plan to make students' money used only for facilities they have access to.
What we need to do at a minimum is make those break even. So the majority of the issues with the students paying for things that they were not receiving was associated with those two properties. Till we get the ownership moved, unfortunately, FSA is going to incur that expense or that indebtedness.
So until the ownership of these properties are put into someone else's hands, every tap you scan on campus is helping FSA fund the lost revenue of these properties. I'm Hope Winter, News 11.
By the end of December, FSA plans to donate the Alumni House to Fredonia's campus and to have the College Lodge to be purchased by the Western New York Land Conservancy as well. FSA notes that this will not change the price of meal plans, but will change where the money will be going. It's been 1 year since the start of construction, and the roundabout at the intersection of routes 20 and 60 is finally nearing completion. Jim Morrissey, Communications Director of the State Transportation Department, says construction paused temporarily to put drainage structures to avoid potential flooding. Construction started again in September, and they're now working into the center island of the traffic circle. The milling and the paving process started about 2 weeks ago.
The gloomy fall weather in the area leaves residents curious about the status of the Dunkirk Breakwall project. Jessica Meditz is here to break it down.
Last Halloween, residents of Dunkirk were spooked by Mother Nature's damage to the Lakefront Boulevard breakwall. The $4 million project collapsed due to high winds and waves, despite being just 3 years old.
You think the city would get on that? They put so much money into it, and then for it to break 3 years or 2 years after that they had built it, and then let it break and not do anything about it, it says something.
So what took so long? The city applied for grants from FEMA to fund the project, which takes time. The damage was ruled a national disaster, and Dunkirk received nearly $600,000 in FEMA funding. The city will provide a local match for the rest of the funding, for a grand total of nearly $250,000. The project is contracted with St. George Enterprises, the same construction company that built the last wall.
The project will be completed by Memorial Day and is set to begin this fall or early spring, depending on the weather.
Dunkirk city officials say that Mayor Wilfred Rosas is strict with the contractor regarding the Memorial Day deadline, and that they are prepared to hold them accountable to their word.
It's a long time coming. It's almost a year. It's probably a year from today that the storm happened, so we're eager to get the project done.
Since last year's damage, the roads by the wall have been roped off. They will be open again for use once completed. Reporting from Dunkirk, New York, Jessica Meditz, News 11.
For updates about the Breakwall project, you can attend the City of Dunkirk's Common Council meetings, which take place on the first and third Tuesdays of the month at 5:30 p.m.
One last local story before we move on to the election. Things are looking up for the birds around Rockefeller Arts Center. Last week, we talked to Justine Bloom, a freshman, who noticed that there is abundance of dead birds on the sidewalks outside of Rockefeller Arts Center. Marcus Kessler, Fredonia's facility planning director, is brainstorming ideas to fix this problem. With the windows of Rockefeller facing the forest on campus, the reflection of the trees trick the birds into believing these windows are a continuation of the woods. Birds fly into the windows and die instantly. When the windows were built, they had a certain coating that reflects from the outside, so closing the blinds doesn't necessarily help. Kessler plans to add polka-dotted film to the outside of the windows to make sure the windows are visible to the birds. This plan is not set into motion yet, and since funding for the film has yet to be figured out. But Kessler plans on having a set schedule and budget plan by the end of November. When we come back, we'll look into two of the biggest stories in the country this week, the pandemic and the election. We'll get into the national election in a moment, but first in Chautauqua County, Republican incumbent Paul Wendell was re-elected as county executive. Republicans Jason Schmidt and John Sidota were also elected as the Chautauqua County District Attorney and the Fredonia Village Trustee, respectively. The Republican Tom Reed was re-elected as congressman for New York's 23rd District, defeating his Democratic challenger, Tracy Mantrano. Now, moving on to the national stage. Election night turned into election week. 4 days after the election, Joe Biden was projected to be the winner. His campaign makes history, of course. He will be the oldest president at 78, but Vice President-elect Kamala Harris will be the first woman and first woman of color to be vice president. This election was, without a doubt, historic and chaotic, and probably exhausting for a lot of people. To try to wrap our heads around what this all means, especially as young adults, we spoke to someone our own age to get a younger perspective. Brooke Strasbaugh is a senior political science major at Kent State University in Ohio and a registered Democrat.
I personally believe he does not have the time to come up with enough cases to overturn the states he would need.
Everyone has projected that Biden will win. States are still counting. Trump, though, hasn't conceded. He's refused to concede, and he's threatening legal action. Does that carry any weight? Like, can he actually do anything?
His legal claims have been so vague and broad that no one has seen like a thread of an actual case that he could put forth that would change anything. So at this point, unless he comes out with something that he's been hiding from all of us that we don't know about, I don't think there's really any, significant legal weight behind what he's saying.
Trump is lame duck president now for 2 months. But if he's not going to make this easy, what kind of fallout or unrest could we see?
The biggest thing that he can do, in my opinion, is just slow things down. It just sets up the new administration for a bit of failure in the beginning. It's going to make it very difficult for them to transition, especially with COVID going on. I think the ideal right now would be to create a joint transition task force, which is what they did in 2008 with the economic crisis.
Are we going to ever hear from him again?
I would count on it. I think that he is not the type of person to do anything silently, ever. I don't know that he will run again, but I expect his son to run sometime in the near future, just from the trends that I'm seeing. But I think his biggest terms of legacy is his nominations and his Supreme Court nominations, because obviously those are for life. And with the people that he nominated having the majority, they have a lot of control over what happens legally in our country.
I don't think the Senate's been called yet.
No, it's going to be a bit because they have 2 runoff races that are decisive.
The runoff elections are in Georgia. The state laws there say that the Senate candidates have to get a majority of the votes in order to win. There are 2 seats up for grabs in Georgia, and none of the candidates broke 50%. So this means basically there will be a rematch on January 5th. If Republicans keep control of the Senate, it'll be an uphill battle for Biden and the House to get things done.
Yeah, I mean, anything lasting, because they control judicial nominations and the legislative agenda. It's not to say that Biden can't get his policies through. He just is going to have to gear them in a significantly more bipartisan way in order to get any support from the Senate. And I think that's definitely been in his message so far, his message about unifying. But I think that should the Republicans regain control or maintain control of the Senate, that will have to be even more at the forefront of his policy making and making sure that, he can draw support from both sides in order to get anything passed. And I think somewhat it's not entirely his fault, the divisiveness towards him. I think a lot of that comes from just the deep partisan divide that has only been deepened the past 4 years. And obviously a lot of that falls on him, but some of it falls also on the people who were elected to the House and the Senate, and just the American people being willing to take a step back and kind of drop party lines and just decide that they need to unify over something.
Do you think that can happen?
I think that we can make strides towards it happening. So I think that Biden's role over the next 4 years in terms of attacking this problem of partisanship should be to lessen the divide. I don't think he's going to by any means be able to knock it down.
The more extreme Democrats, is it going to be easier for them to find common ground with him than the more moderate Republicans even?
I genuinely think that he might have more sway with the moderate Republican side than the far left. I think a lot of people were surprised in the general election with how much compromising those aggressively left people did. But I think that the unifying force there was this anti-Trump sentiment. So with that taken out of the picture, I do think that there will be more of a push back towards the left and saying well, we're not fighting against Trump anymore, so now we're fighting against Biden to get what we want. And I think that's very much a reckoning for both political parties, in that we cannot continue the cycle every 4 years of the lesser of 2 evils. It's not going to work. People can't just vote against someone. They need to have a candidate that they can vote for. And I think that needs to be a point for both parties moving forward when they nominate their next presidential nominee.
Is it fair to say that one of the things that would help in that would be someone younger?
I think that is the way forward. Every 4 years, more and more young people are turning 18 and getting involved in politics and caring about it. And it's going to get to the point where that they're going to be the majority. I think they need someone that is their age, not only to unify them, but also just to bring that perspective. Having this upper bracket age group of elected officials is not very representative of our country.
Do you think we could see very soon a woman president? Or
I absolutely do. I think that Hillary Clinton showed that you're starting from a step back as a woman in terms of winning over the opinion of people. I don't think it's necessarily policy based. It's that internalized misogyny that a lot of people have. But I think that if it's the right person, now is the time. And, Kamala definitely shattered that glass ceiling. And of course, there's one above it. But I think that trend ignited a fire in a lot of women who are now going to become active in politics.
So what can we take away as a lesson from this? Because this has been so crazy, especially as young people, like you said, because, we will become the majority. Looking to the future, what can we learn from this?
I think number one definitely is the idea of finding someone to nominate and vote for and campaign for that you genuinely support and who pushes the view of America that you want, rather than that fighting against somebody. For example, let's just say far left. A lot of people that are supporters of far left candidates, when they have to go with someone like Biden, do they just kind of have to settle? In this election, I think we were all aware that they did, because, it was never going to be a landslide beat to Trump. They knew that they needed every vote they could get. And I think that, unfortunately, that rallying against mentality worked for them in this scenario, because those people that normally would never have supported Biden supported him in the name of anti-Trump. And I think that's an even deeper issue is that the right way to move forward? Because that does lead to this mindset of, well, this is my candidate, but they lost, so I guess I'll go with whoever my party nominated. So it's difficult. And I think in order to change that mindset would require an entire reckoning of our political system and people really making changes to more than just the people in charge, but the way that it's done. I don't really see that happening in the near future. It sounds like a broken record. I feel like every news outlet is saying this, but partisanship is so toxic to this country, and it can't continue deepening the way that it is without things only getting worse. And I think it's hard for young people because a lot of us are so passionate about politics, and it's so much now centered around human rights and things that we don't see as opinions, but facts. But I think that regardless of whether or not you respect the other, opponent's opinion, you're going to get more done by taking a step back and treating it as a conversation, as a dialogue, rather than a fight. So, of course, it's going to continue to be emotional and really, really important. But I think that we need to work towards a shallower depth of partisanship in this country in order to have real, meaningful, systemic change.
That interview was on Monday evening, and yesterday, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said, quote, "There will be a smooth transition into a second Trump administration," end quote.
The U.S. has now surpassed a total of 10 million COVID-19 cases, and the NBC News says that number could reach 20 million by Christmas. Last week, coronavirus hospitalizations reached an all-time high of 60,000, with a daily average of about 1,661 new hospitalizations. Dr. Anthony Fauci warns that the situation could get much worse if the American people don't start taking the pandemic seriously. The recent election has also raised concern for another spike in coronavirus cases. After the announcement of Joe Biden as the projected presidential-elect, thousands of people took to the streets to celebrate and also protest. Many have reported a lack of social distancing and mask wearing at these gatherings, raising the risk of transmission. As for a vaccine, Fauci has reassured Americans by stating, quote, "The vaccine is on its way, folks, so hang in there, hang tough," unquote. According to Fauci, a potential vaccine has been found to be more than 90% effective, according to clinical results. Okay, we're going to throw it over to Dee Thomas and Kevin Syracuse for a look at our sports and weather this week.
Thanks, Ryan. Today we saw rain showers early in the morning, which dropped the almost 80-degree temperatures we saw yesterday to less than 60 degrees. The sun did poke through in the afternoon, however, and it will remain clear throughout the night with lows dropping down to 40. Tomorrow the sun will be back as we'll have highs reaching 50 degrees. As for the rest of the week, Friday will be sunny and 52, Saturday will be cloudy and 47, and then the rain will return on Sunday as we will have a high of 58 with an 80% chance of rain.
The World Series came to an end on October 27th as the Los Angeles Dodgers defeated the Tampa Bay Rays 3-1 in Game 6 to become the 2020 champions. The series went back and forth for the first 4 games, but the Dodgers then won Games 5 and 6 to seal the series. Corey Seeger was named World Series Most Valuable Player in a unanimous vote with his .400 batting average, .556 on-base percentage, 2 home runs, 5 RBIs, and 7 runs scored. He became the first player to be named World Series MVP and the Champion Series MVP in the same season since Madison Bumgarner won both in 2014. This was the Dodgers' 7th title in franchise history and first since 1988. Now moving over to the NFL, the Buffalo Bills pulled off another win this Sunday by defeating the Seattle Seahawks 44-34 in Orchard Park. This moved their record to 7-2, and Seattle dropped to 6-2. Josh Allen completed 31 of 38 attempts for 415 yards and had 3 touchdowns. This was Allen's second time throwing for more than 400 yards this season in his career. Russell Wilson completed 38 of 41 attempts for a total of 390 yards and had 2 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. For the Bills, Zach Moss had 9 carries, 18 yards, and 1 touchdown. Stephon Diggs led with 9 receptions and 118 yards. For the Seahawks, DJ Dallas had 7 carries and 31 yards, and DK Metcalf had 7 receptions, 108 yards, and 1 touchdown. Buffalo and Seattle both remain in first place in the AFC East and AFC West. This Sunday, Buffalo will face off against the Arizona Cardinals, who are 5-3 at State Farm Stadium.
So 7-2.
7-2.
I think that the Bills will be able to beat Seattle and Russell Wilson, who looked unbeatable, but that proved the new narrative that you can win with offense, because people kept saying, well, you don't need a defense because Seattle's proving that you can win without a defense, but that came back to bite them on Sunday.
Yeah, definitely. And I also, Steelers are 8-0. They defeated the Cowboys this weekend, so they're still the only undefeated team in the series. And we just got an alert for baseball that Bieber won the Cy Young Award unanimously. So that's amazing for him. Triple Crown winner this season.
And we'll see who wins the NL Cy Young momentarily.
Yes, definitely. So that does it for sports, and we're going to go back to Ryan and hope for the rest of the news.
Thanks, guys. For the 6th time on Tuesday, Puerto Ricans voted in favor of U.S. statehood. With a turnout of 51%, the territory voted 52% to 48% in favor of the referendum. A vast majority of those who voted in favor of statehood plan to use this movement to their advantage and increase their leverage. However, many Republicans in Congress view the movement as a way to add Democratic senators and representatives. Former White House Global Engagement Director Brett Bruen says, quote, "This is largely a symbolic vote, but one that has significance. If the island's wish for independence is not honored, that creates a major blemish on America's global image. It would look like Washington is standing in the way of Puerto Ricans' democratic aspirations," end quote. According to NBC News, as of Wednesday, the candidate of the pro-statehood New Progressive Party is predicted to beat out the other pro-status quo candidate by 12,000 votes. 5 years ago, the U.S. helped forge a worldwide pact of countries committed to reversing the effects of climate change. Last Wednesday, the day after the election, the U.S. left the agreement. We are the only country in the world not signed onto the accord. President-elect Joe Biden says that he will rejoin the agreement on Inauguration Day. The U.S. withdrawal doesn't immediately make a difference on efforts to curb climate change, but the UN agency in charge of the agreement expressed its disappointment with the Trump administration's decision. After China, the U.S. is the second largest emitter of greenhouse gases. The planet has already warmed 2.2 degrees Fahrenheit since pre-industrial times. The Paris Agreement aims to keep that number under 2.7 degrees, but the agreement has received criticism because it doesn't have any way to enforce that countries stick to their promises.
One more local story tonight before we go. Season 5 of The Small Business Revolution has finally premiered. The first episode premiered on Tuesday and featured the hosts Amanda Brigman and Ty Pennington working with nice and clean auto detailing on West Main Street in Fredonia. The show started filming last spring but got interrupted because of the pandemic. But the crew worked through it and continued to help the Fredonia businesses remotely. Season 5 is available to watch online on Hulu or Small Business Revolution's YouTube page.
So, Hope, did you say that you were in quarantine then?
I am in quarantine before I go home to my mother, who's high risk. So I'm COVID negative, though, which is a good thing. But are you in quarantine, Ryan?
Yeah, I'm in quarantine until Saturday, but I've also tested negative as well. So I'm just going to wait it out, hope for the best.
Those cases are rising, though. I've heard a lot of people are coming down with it. So it's important to stay safe out there and don't go out unless you need to. And
I was going to pull my Lysol, but it's not in reach. So.
I got my hand sanitizer right here, actually.
Oh,
right
well,
here.
You're more prepared than I.
I'm not seeing anyone, but, I'm prepared, so it's okay. Well, that does it for us on News 11. We'll have one more remote show next week before winter break. As always, thanks to our crew, and good night, everybody.